promote pre-1840 activities. We dress up in period correct attire. Some of us may try that tomorrow. It's a hot day, some of the 11th. We generally wear, we decided we might not be able to do that today. Like my wife says, we just think we're mountain men. We're pretty tough guys. But our purpose is to promote the establishment of North America west of the Mississippi River prior to 1840. And Lewis and Clark expedition commissioned by President Jefferson, all three of those guys were master masons. As Art told me today, just about everybody in the 1800s and 1700s in this nation were master masons that founded the country. But our purpose is to travel and to try to do the work of the craft and to bring excitement and knowledge to the public about rendezvous, the mountain men era, the fur trade era. Every year we commission someone to build us a special one-of-a-kind rifle that we use for fundraising. And we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Hawken. We have commissioned Jim Parker from Warrior, Alabama, to build us a one-of-a-kind Hawken. He's built a couple other really fine one-of-a-kind rifles for us. This one is silver inlaid. It's his rendition of a Hawken. It's a really fancy Hawken, if you will, like the Steamboat, which was a very special silver inlaid Hawken. This gun has been appraised by some curators worth $25,000 to $30,000, and confirmed this morning by Art, who's the guy that brought this Hawken back to life, if you will. And that's what he does, appraise firearms. He agrees that it's probably a $25,000 to $30,000 gun. Somebody's going to win it for a $5 ticket, and the money all goes to charity. But Bob, I want to thank him for dealing with it. This guy's really involved and organized, gets emails and helps put this together. And I assure you, we travel all over the country and we do a lot of rendezvous. We do all the NRA shows and conventions. And to put something like this together, it takes a lot of effort. So you and your team can be commended for that. We appreciate the invitation to be here. What I wanted to talk about when he told me he'd like to have us maybe bring some information about our program and what we do, I thought I would share with you guys what we believe in our research is the reason that there is a Hawken. Of course, we know Jacob and Samuel had a store here in St. Louis, but I'm going to try to explain to you the Hawken itself was probably produced 20 years before they came to St. Louis. My dad was no Navy SEAL, UDT guy in World War II. He told me, particularly after church some Sundays, that all programs should have a good beginning and a good ending, and they should be kept as close together as possible. I'm going to do my best to keep this as close together as possible. Some of these guys are going to use PowerPoints and all this stuff, and I told Bob, most of the places we go to rendezvous, we don't have power. I don't need a microphone. We really don't know what to do with all this power and TV, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of history we come up with. But our band of brothers, as we're called, we travel all over America. We promote our heritage. And our mission as a 501c3 is dedicated to preserve the history of the mountain man, the fur trade, Western Masonic history, Native American history, and the settlement period of lands lying west of the Mississippi River prior to 1840. We have a foundation organized exclusively for charitable purposes. We're committed to historical accuracy, preserving the skills of our first settlers, pioneers, and the mountain men, and utilizing muzzle-loading firearms and the equipment and accoutrements that accomplished that use. We endeavor to provide education, good fellowship, promote and maintain high standards of safety and sportsmanship, and historically accurate appreciation of activities and equipment utilized during the mountain men era. Like I said, in honor of the 200th anniversary, we commissioned a Hawken rifle. It's built by Jim Parker, who is here with the rifle. It's across the way over there behind the anniversary tent where they signed him in. He's from Warrior, Alabama. He's a great gun builder. He's here if anybody has any technical questions about the swamping barrel. The parts all came from the Hawken shop, and the engraving that he did in the silver on that rifle. I'd encourage you to take a look at it while you're here. You might want a chance now. I was first introduced to black powder from my dad from him, and I learned to respect and love the importance of the founding of our republic. As a young oil and gas guy working in the Appalachian Mountains along the participated in over-the-log shoots in the gatherings in the Daniel Boone National Forest. If you have the opportunity to walk where our forefathers worked to gain our freedom of this nation, your respect for the utilization of these important firearms will be forever entrenched in your heart. Many of us have read and heard the stories of brothers with a spirit of adventure and entrepreneurial talents exemplified through the operation of the Hawken shop in St. Louis. The success of the Hawken brothers is well documented. Jake and Samuel were well-trained gunsmiths and part of possibly the largest legacy of American gun builders that we have record of in the growth and expansion of early America. Some 15 different men utilized the master skills handed down through Christian Hawken. Chris was an extremely talented gunmaker and a blacksmith. He was born in Switzerland in 1756. He provided the foundation and expertise that launched his sons to tremendously famous, successful, and renowned gun builders that they became. Skills were inherited, teachings, and talent. There were many great gun builders during this period, so many that eventually the Hawkens became set apart and captivated them with great success, primarily because of their training from their father. This is where the fur trade and the mountain era of America's early settlement enter our reflection on the Hawken rifle and its position as the most revered and sought-after firearm of its time, and today it holds even a special place in America's history. Some might argue that other great craftsmen and gun builders contributed as much or more to our country's early growth and greatness as the Hawken brothers. No doubt, rifles made by Thomas Simpson and others were the catalyst that allowed General President Andrew Jackson to win the Battle of New Orleans and finally secure our independence. In the General's own words, speaking to a newspaper writer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in his interview he proclaimed that if it were not for the Patriots who answered the call to duty with their Kentucky long rifles, the battle would have been lost. You see, they were in the top of cypress trees that could kill the enemy at 100 yards. The British were still shooting scatterguns, so they were outnumbered at 300 Kentucky long rifles, beating hundreds of the British. We all know the story of the shot heard around the world at the beginning of America's Revolution. The simple long rifle in the hands of Captain John Parker. He was the captain of the 1st Militia at the Battle of Lexington, where he told the guys and proclaimed on the town square early that morning, "Do not fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." And with that, and the return shot from a simple Pennsylvania long rifle, our struggle for independence began. This nation's establishment and her freedom were born under the smoke of black powder. And it grew to include the lands across the continent with the flint and percussion of the Hawken. We know the chronological dates of this great family and their skills, but how did they become such a huge part of America's expansion and lead the Hawken brothers and their rifles to such an elite standing in our history and such great wealth of family? Utilizing much research and extrapolation of documents, recordings from that period, Masonic lodges, and other research offerings, we believe the mountain men in the fur trade era, which was initiated due to the great expedition under the orders from Brother and President Thomas Jefferson, is truly the root, if you will, of the great Hawken rifle. President Jefferson was desirous of opening up the route for commerce and settlement to the Pacific, and to further solidify and control the lands west of the Mississippi River that he had acquired through the Louisiana Purchase. The result was the Corps Discovery, or the Lewis and Clark Expedition, as we know it. It's never been surpassed in our history for such an important mission accomplished with a small arsenal of arms. The success and result of the expedition and its arms was a vast new empire for America. The expedition depending on its guns for food, diplomacy, and defense. The men utilized rifles, blunderbuss, powder horns, bullet pouches, tomahawks, and knives. Lewis and Clark also had a pair of pistols. Other than these, these items commissioned for their journey, one of the most important items was Captain Lewis's air gun. Most people don't even realize it. It provided big medicine, if you will, for the Indians. And it thwarted many events for Native Americans with its quiet magic. The budget for arms and accoutrements prepared by Lewis to give to the President and Congress was $81. Of course, like today, that $81 grew a little bit by the time the government got through with it. The total budget was $2,500. It was approved by Congress. And we know many of the items were not listed on the estimate because they were requisitioned at the order of the President from the Army. Therein lies a little bit of the secret why you can't read much about what happened with this initial rifle. Captain Lewis chose William Clark as his co-captain for the expedition, knowing his expertise and skills with firearms, having served under him in a company of sharpshooters and riflemen. These men were both master masons and would become great friends and become the most famous partners in American history. The choice of Clark and his knowledge of firearms would be the action that would eventually catapult the Hawken to its renowned position in American history. We know from Lewis's list of needed items presented to Israel Whalen, he was the purveyor of public supplies, and Whalen's purchase of supplies for the expedition included a pair of pocket pistols, 176 pounds of gunpowder, 52 leaded powder cannons, 15 powder horns and pouches, and other requisitions, including 15 additional powder horns for spare, 18 tomahawks, 15 scalping knives and belts, 500 rifle flints, 50 pounds of best rifle powder, a pair of horseman pistols, 420 pounds of sheep lead, and he wrote that extremely important, whiskey, tobacco, and other necessities. It should be noted when they returned from the great expedition, Lewis told the President they were out of whiskey, and they were out of tobacco and Indian gifts, but they had enough lead and powder and rifles to do it again. They didn't have no more whiskey. Lewis requested 15 rifles, 30 bullet molds, and extra parts of locks and tools for gun repair. These items were not filled by Whalen's department. Herein lies the secret. These items were specifically made at Harper's Ferry Arsenal, the Army Arsenal that was built in 1796 at the confluence of the Shenandoah and Potomac River, where Robert Harper had established a ferry. The Army turned out its first small arms in 1801. This is where Captain Lewis was dispatched to place his special order for the rifles to be used in the expedition. There is some uncertainty surrounding the rifle models produced for the expedition, partially, we think, because President Jefferson was permitting a U.S. government arsenal to manufacture arms for an expedition into foreign territory. This in itself, it would be considered, if published, an act of war. These guys and brothers, they were Masons, and they got it, and they did this without the public knowledge. They were too smart to allow the Spanish or the French or the British to know that they were going to have an army involved in an expedition into their country. They're much too wise for that to be recorded. Therein lies some of the gap in how this rifle was developed, because it was developed somewhat in secrecy. We know Clark ordered half stocks, deep curved butt plates, and were reduced to half the normal length of a Kentucky long rifle. This allowed better use, he said, in a P-road, making the rifle safer and less susceptible to damage. He wanted a rib solid beneath the barrel. Remember, he was a sharpshooter. He wanted accuracy. And he wanted a 54 caliber, which was huge in the day. People wanted 38, 30, whatever, too. That'd be small game. The patch boxes were fitted with brass along with the guards and stock, and they were just like those of Indian trade Kentucky long rifles of the day. He was satisfied with the rifle that they designed, with the armors, and we know from his notes, on July the 7th, 1803, he met and reported to the President that they had fired the new rifles and they were excellent and well executed. So, the rifles were produced at the armory, and they are a identical copy of what we know now as a Hawken. A little different, not much. The first Harper's Ferry model officially listed in the public record is 1803, when they produced some 4,000 rifles in the fall for the Army, for the war. Some call the expedition rifle that Clark ordered the model 1800 Harper's Ferry model, but you won't find that listed anywhere in the public ledger. This special rifle designed by Clark was produced at the Armory, and James Layton, a Virginia gunsmith, we believe worked on the design and production of this specially ordered cut-off rifle. He later became friends with Jacob Hawken, who went to work at the Armory years later, from 1807 to 1818. Of course, 1807 was after the expedition, several years after the initial 15, if you will, Hawken rifle. When Jacob decided to come west, everybody was coming west, then they'd open the doors, mountain men, Lewis and Clark, and the expedition, people started going west. Jacob wanted to go west and leave the Army. He did so, and he taught James Layton, his first partner, to come with him. So they opened up in St. Louis in 1819. Together, they would further the manufacture and design of those first 15 rifles ordered by Lewis and Clark for frontier use. We believe this was the rebirth, if you will, of what they originally called the Rocky Mountain rifle, and the birth at the Hawken shop of the Hawken rifle. Except for Captain Clark's request and a description of the rifle, ample to be carried across unexplored territory on foot or on horseback, and utilized in close quarters in a pirogue, maneuverable with such sufficient power to combat the unknown, and the completion of this design and request by the armorers at Harper's Ferry, the Hawken as we know it might never have been created. With the expedition opening up settlement to the west to American expansion, it was soon discovered by those who continued to travel, and guide west, basically the mountain men, that this special rifle was a perfect protection, and its design was improved much over any firearm that was available in that day. It was magnificent to take down big game, elk, moose, mule deer, antelope. It provided invaluable use with encounters with the grizzly bear. And possibly its best surprise was its ability to take down a buffalo at 200 paces. 32 or 38, previously known Kentucky long rifle, would have a little trouble with the buffalo at 200 paces. With its firepower and with the expertise of well-seasoned users, men in the field with a Hawken could fire it and load it twice in a minute. This deterred many skirmishes with Native Americans. Due to its unequal success on the Great Plains and the wilderness, the timing could have not been better for the Hawken to become the most sought-after firearm in American history. Many famous mountain men, master masons like Lewis, Clark, Jefferson, John Coulter, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, Hugh Glass, Jedediah Smith, Theodore Roosevelt, John Brown, the Mormon pioneer. All of these guys carried a Hawken. Mountain men and cheap land contributed to the great demand for the Hawken. This demand would be supercharged with the discovery of gold and the gold rush, which is a little bit later than the first settlement wave to the west. The demand for the Hawken would continue to increase after Jacob's first partner and the initial designer died. But that prompted Samuel to join Jacob in St. Louis in 1825. Initially, the Hawken was handmade. It included the barrels, locks, and hardware that they built in stock. Later, due to high demand, most of the iron items were sourced out to other gunsmiths and builders. Most of the stocks were still and always done in-house at the Hawken shop. The majority of the Hawkens produced were percussion rifles, although at first all the rifles were flintlock. The Hawkens would not only be gunsmiths and gunmakers, but records indicate that about 60% of their business was from the Rocky Mountain or Hawken rifle. But Samuel, when he came to St. Louis, he was a great marketer. and insisted on providing a one-stop shop for the mountain men and those traveling west. Many rifles were ordered, made and shipped west, sold, and traded from early American rendezvous with the mountain men until 1840. Most everyone could muster the money for trade goods. If they had any money, then they could get it. They toted a Hawken, especially before the Civil War. The Hawkins provided pistols from $8 to $18. They had Plains model rifles for $20, to the best grade for $38. $18 for a full stock. It's unusual, but they wanted $25 for the most popular half stock. They built you a shotgun for $10. They also provided powder, lead, molds, balls, hospitals, knives, all that. And they also did horseshoes. So they wasn't just gun builders, they actually were a one-stop shop if you were leaving St. Louis headed to the unknown. The first real bulk order to come in the Hawken shop was the American Fur Company. That was in 1849, and that was because of the gold rush. And they built 120 rifles that year. By this time, the Hawken was revered as a must-have, high-quality, expensive weapon of choice. And not until the invention of a breech loader like Sharp's and Samuel Cope's inventions would the desire of the Hawken begin to subside. Until this time, the Hawken had no real competition. Samuel had the chance and was offered by a feather mason brother, Samuel Cope, to market and sell his Cope firearms. Samuel refused. He wanted to sell a Hawken. After Jacob Hawken died in 1849, during the heyday of the business, Samuel continued in St. Louis until 1855, where he left the business in the hands of his son Windham. Samuel would reopen the shop in Aurora, Colorado in 1859 to 1860. His first rifle produced in Colorado would be the first rifle he ever stocked with boxed elk, a wood rather than the normal sugar maple or stump duck maple that he used to make weapons out of even back before he came to St. Louis. But it showed that he was a true marketing genius. He erected a giant rifle placed on a swivel atop a tall pole that could be seen for far and wide, rotated with the wind like a windmill above his shop in Colorado. His Colorado-made rifles were marked S. Hawken, Aurora, J.T., which represented Jefferson Territory, before the states were there. It's a great example of his later Hawken. It's a very rare find to find a Hawken made by Samuel in Colorado. The only one I've ever seen is at the Cody Firearms Museum in Cody, Wyoming. There's a great multi-million-dollar display here of Hawken. Anxious to see if there's possibly one there. I don't know. Art didn't know if there's one made in Colorado. He doesn't think so. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the great expedition of fur trade and the mountaineer, were the catalyst for the design and success of the Hawken rifle without question. They solidified it as one of the most important weapons in the establishment of a great nation, the United States of America. Hawken made it possible for the mountain men to open up the Stony or Rocky Mountain, the surveying of the Continental Divide, the Bighorn Mountains, the Bitterroots, Yellowstone country, the rivers and tributaries west of the Mississippi River. This rich fur-laden land led settlers west, many over the Hawken. At the end of the 1840 rendezvous on the banks of the Green River, at the converse of Forest Creek, near Daniel, Wyoming today, you can go and walk where they walk. It's very historically moving. This short era of American history in 1840 was over forever. Expansion and homesteading after 640 acres near the Oregon Trail had started. The great Hawken rifle would prosper for several more years, and as we witness here at this place, the final home of the great patriot of master mason himself and explorer in his own right, Daniel Boone, who no doubt would have toted a Hawken had they been available. The love of the Hawken rifle is still alive and well, even though its need ended about that time. I'm sure Jacob and Samuel could not have imagined, surely not his father, the lasting impact they were having on the establishment of a republic. We cannot give enough credit as a grateful people to the Hawken brothers and their Hawken rifle for their place in our history. It took several generations to pass before due recognition was finally given to Lewis and Clark, the Great Expedition, and the Hawkins for their impact and importance to our history. Eventually, Hollywood would get on board and respond with productions like The Mountain Man, Grizzly Adams, Jeremiah Johnson, and The Revenant. This would bring attention to this era and those who helped make America a free and great nation. All of us can reminisce and reflect that glorious time in our history with a Hawken in hand on a mountainside, and even that monumental scene where Robert Redford and Jeremiah Johnson finds a much-needed tool, a long-desired and needed quality rifle, a Hawken, when he discovered it frozen in the hands of its original owner, who knew its value and cherished it so much, he wrote a note and attached it to his body that read, "I, Hatchet Jack, being of sound mind and broke legs, do hereby leave my bear rifle to whatever finds it. Lord, hope it be a white man. It is a good rifle, and it killed the bear that killed me. Anyway, I am dead." I appreciate the privilege and honor to be with you. Thank you. Anybody got a question? Yes, sir.
Junior Chamber for Sam Hawken, Mason.
Martin.
Junior Chamber for Sam Hawken, Mason.
Both of them.
Okay. What about others in the first grade?
Just about all the guys on the expedition were Masons, the Lewis and Clark expedition. Some of them were made Masons after the expedition started. And we know they ordered special Masonic swords and other things. And most of it came from St. Louis. Initially, they were coming back to St. Louis for supplies. Then they started going west and having to rendezvous west because the traders knew that if they could get west with the supplies and enough whiskey, that these trappers would trap for a year when they brought their supplies in. By the time they left, they had to work for the company again. They was out of money. They spent all their money on if you would, whatever you want to call it, having a good time at the rendezvous and buying Hawkins or where they get additional traps. So most of those guys, the ones I listed, if you look at the names of the rivers in the west, and stuff around Yellowstone, Coker's Hell, and all those guys were Masons. And Mountain Men became a tremendously independent group of men. They didn't want the establishment, even a few settlers trying to homestead 640 acres or whatever. That's not what they wanted. Just like in the Jeremiah Johnson movie, where the guy talking about down in the Flatlanders, they kind of call it spring or whatever in March, and it's a little bit muddy. They didn't want to be around a lot of people. They went west. They were the only ones there. They were guiding people, and it got in their spirit. They didn't want to be around any subdivision or town or fort or whatever except to get supplies. To answer your question, most everybody of any influence during that era, from George Washington on, were Master Masons. Just like Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson, of course, and Paul Revere, all those guys that we read about, if you really dig into their history and where they were from in the local Masonic lodge, you will find all of them took the time that generations have passed now. Most people say, well, I've had two people today tell me that their fathers were Masons. And Art was one of them, Art's 93. He said, I never had time to become a Mason because it takes a lot of time. Well, I didn't have time either back when I did it in 1980. Man sitting right there in the front row of the past Grand Master, he didn't have time. He worked in the Dominican Republic, traveled all over the world. And my father told me something, like I say, being an old Navy SEAL, I presume him one of the wisest men I've ever known. Not the most educated, but he was a wise man. He said, well, everybody has the same amount of time. They 24 in a day for everybody. It's just what you decide to spend your time doing. Some folks really have jobs or other things that go on with them. But back in that time frame, if you wanted to do commerce or interact with your brethren, probably started at the lodge because they knew they could trust trust you. Even Washington himself would let you serve below the rank of a captain if you wasn't in the lodge. But he didn't know if he could trust you. Benjamin Franklin's own son was a traitor. He'd been promised 10,000 acres from the king. See? So you had to be really careful. Even the Boston Tea Party, they met in the Masonic Lodge. The Masons did, went upstairs, changed into Indian-looking outfits, went aboard the ship, threw the tea in the harbor. All three up in the Masonic Lodge, and got on board the ship. So our history is interwoven with Masonic history tremendously, particularly with Lewis and Clark in the pre-1840 era, most everybody. Anybody else?
How can we find out more about the mountain men and intertwined with mountain man history and tribals that the Masons have done as a group and how you travel?
Well, there's some great books. One of the best books to read about really the mountain and the birth of it is the ledger or the diary of Meriwether Lewis. He had a great diary. So did one of his men. So did Clark. Some of them couldn't spell well and didn't have good grammar, if you will. But you can read the parallels of what they all wrote on a day, and what Clark had written, what Lewis had written, what different ones on the core had written. That's a great place to see the birth, if you will, of the mountain in there. Now, there were a couple of fur traders that had come through Canada, the French, that had not been as far as Meriwether Lewis, of course, they were before Tasslock on the Pacific coast, but they had been down, we think, in northern Montana. They had not made it to Yellowstone. But reading their diary sets you up on a course to understand exactly what they did, how they did. And after the fact, the guys who were on the expedition, when Lewis came back and Clark came back, of course, they got land grants. That was part of their pay. And, of course, Lewis had gone to New Orleans, and he was on the Natchez Trace and come through Mississippi. And they discovered him dead and his money missing. He had his Masonic apron on, had his blood on it. Some people think he committed suicide. Of course, the historians don't believe that to be correct because his purse was missing, his money was missing. But that was after the expedition. But the mountain man, he was still dealing with the president. He was the president's personal secretary. He really was the mountain man. But the Corps, those men that they trained that went westward, all those guys pretty much became mountain men. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I don't know how relevant this is to the conversation, but I read recently in Muzzleloader or some magazine, I wish I could read the author. He wrote a pretty compelling argument for why the Hawken brothers, there is no surviving flintlock rifles of the era of 1823 to 1830. And that's because during that time, the Hawken brothers were establishing their blacksmith shop. They were fixing traps and getting up a trade goods store and all these different things. And they just quit building rifles during that period because they already had Lehman's, Henry's, Derringer, very good, serviceable weapons. And there was I guess the market just wouldn't bear out them providing their own rifle in competition with these already fine rifles out there. And then when the percussion system came out, the Hawken brothers were able to leap upon, be able to see the future, and against Lehman, Henry, all these other great rifles out there, they were the first one to build a percussion rifle, and then being the first ones, kind of like the Learjet or something. For years, it was known as a Learjet. Any business jet's known as a Lear. Well, every rifle, it just made sense that they jumped on the percussion. All the mountain men jumped on that Hawken, and that's what blew up the name, and they became the dominant force in rifle making. But I don't know, what do you think about that?
That's a good argument. I don't think I necessarily agree that that's 100% the case. Because when percussion first came out, mountain men didn't want a percussion. they like it. But if you're in a zero, and you walking through the wilderness, and you going through rivers and stuff, you can find a rock, and you can make a spark. And I've read history where the guy that said, had I not had my flintlock, it would have been my demise. I think, you know, we're talking about the lock really instead of the rifle. I think for that period, one reason you're not finding a lot of flintlocks is because they converted them later to percussion. You know, there was a lot of that happened, but the original guys, they didn't. The percussion was more money at first. And you had to have the material, but I don't think the original guys wanted them because they were afraid they'd get wet. Yes, sir.
I find pretty much exclusively with the flintlock rifle on the plain canyons, okay? And after you set on the deer stand for 4 or 5 hours, starting way before sunup, and then try to put a percussion cap on a damn rifle with your fingers that feel like Lincoln Law.
That's right.
I'm convinced that the primary gun for a long time was a flintlock rifle. But if you run a comparison as to, in my book, how many they may have manufactured versus how many 1860 Colts have survived, or Spencers have survived, you go in there. This was a gun that was being used. It got used, and sometimes it wound up being plugged and got broke. So the mortality rate is probably, in my book, is about the same as what it would have been on anybody else's guns. But you had 200 years of building flintlock rifles and stuff back in the eastern seaboard, and later in the late 1870s, for the large part, the Indian wars had pretty much ceased. So all they were hunting guns.
It's a use factor. They were used. That's not
That's all, you know. But this gun saved your life every day of the day.
You didn't have to worry about couldn't pick up that percussion cap and stick it on it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt from what I've read and what the research I've done. Original guys, even after percussion came to play, they preferred it. It saved their life. You know, and
It was. And I don't know if the stock got broken in half, you get the iron parts off of it, put it in your duffel bag. When you get back to St. Louis, dump it on the table, and say rebuild it.
I didn't know.
You know?
There's thousands.
I just wish somebody could step out and say, here's one. But it makes good conversation and drinking good whiskey.
I go over that. A guy serving in the neighborhood, he retired. I said, well, what are you going to do now? He said, my job is to turn good whiskey into beer.
I'll tell you what, they're fun to carry up in the damn mountains. They are heavy.
They're heavy, and you're right about that. I have a place in South Dakota. Didn't get 40 to 60 below zero on my ranch. If you're going to hunt with flint or a black powder, you're exactly right. You don't want to be digging around in anything for anything to stick on the nipple. It ain't going to work. Particularly what you got on your hand to keep them from frostbite. You